So people are starting to trickle in. I think we'll get started in a minute.
You should have music.
I think we need like some kind of like intro animation or something.
I used the for a while on my Zooms. I was using the Jeopardy music, and it would be really appropriate today as everyone is remembering Alex Trebek. Yeah.
It's also nice while I'm still a panelist to see, I can see who's coming in, so many awesome people. So maybe we should start so that we have plenty of time for the program itself. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Stamatina Gregory, and I'm the Chief Curator and Director of Programs here at the Leslie-Lohman Museum of Art. So welcome to the third of our 4 events with our 2019-2020 cohort of Artist Fellows. So just some quick housekeeping. This event is being recorded. It is also being streamed on our YouTube channel, and there will be captioning on that stream. So that link will be made available in the chat if you choose to watch there. The event format will allow a Q&A at the end. So if questions come up during the event, please ask them in the Q&A so they are available to our moderator. And I'll tell you, if you're joining us for the first time, a little bit about the LLM Artist Fellowship. The fellowship just admitted its 4th cohort, and it's really a cornerstone of our organization. So the fellowship is designed to empower and support queer artists. And our fellows participate in a series of professional development workshops that emphasize strategic planning, peer-to-peer learning, mentorship, and community building across disciplines to create a sustainable art practice. There's a seminar series component led by Elisa Schwartz, which brings critical discourse and historical context to the program, with topics including queer history, representation, intersectionality, and queer reparations. Our fellows also take part in a biannual curated group exhibition at the museum, and the exhibition of the work of our first 2 cohorts, organized by our former assistant curator, Danielle Sander, and our curatorial assistant, Angela Hallinan, will open this February at the museum, hopefully in person. We'll see. I want to thank the Ford Foundation, the funders of our fellowship, for making this work that we do possible. Special thanks to Rocio Aranda Alvarado, with whom we work there. And I want to thank my colleagues in this endeavor, including our interim director, Laura Rekovic, who cannot be here tonight due to a conflict, as well as our education and programs manager, Nirvana Santos, who is my close collaborator in conceiving and organizing this series. I want to thank all this year's fellows who underwent a major disruption in their programs and opportunities due to COVID, and who, despite these ongoing obstacles, remained resilient and creative. And of course, I want to thank and introduce our wonderful and intrepid fellowship director, Ella Troiano, an interdisciplinary artist with a decades-long career. She's also worked for many years in professional development for artists as a lecturer, a workshop leader, and an individual coach. Her labor and her vision have been instrumental in making the fellowship what it is today. So please welcome Ella Troiano, who will introduce our fellows and also introduce Tavia Nyong'o, tonight's wonderful respondent. Thank you, Ella.
Hi. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. It's so exciting to be here with you all. Tavia Nyong'o, I am thrilled to be introducing him because we have a little bit of history and a shared friend. Tavia Nyong'o is professor of African American Studies, and Theater and Performance Studies at Yale University. His research interests include the ethics and aesthetics of social and cultural analysis. His books include The Amalgamation Waltz, Race, Performance, and the Ruses of Memory, University of Minnesota, 2009, which won the Errol Hill Award for Best Book in African American Theater and Performance Studies, and Afrofabulations, the Queer Drama of Black Life, NYU Press, 2018. We're very happy, thrilled to welcome Tavia.
Thank you, Ella, for that kind invitation. And thank you to Nirvana and Stamatina for the invitation to moderate this conversation with these three wonderful artists who I'm going to get out of the way of momentarily and let the audience learn more about their wonderful work. So so the way we're going to structure the conversation is to I'm going to introduce each of the three panelists in turn, and they'll speak. I'll ask them like one question, and then I'll go on to the next, and then we will have a wrap up conversation amongst the four of us. And please be thinking about your questions along the way. The Q&A function in the webinar can be used at any time. So if you want to start asking questions, feel free to do that, and I will moderate those questions at the end of the at the end of our discussion amongst the panel. So without further ado, let me call the first presenter, who is Alison Viana. Alison is a visual artist based in Brooklyn, New York. Her work stems from a place of longing and desire for a sense of community, something that maybe many of us can identify with. She centers those who are often underrepresented and overlooked, primarily focusing on LGBTQ+ communities. She earned her BFA in photography from Parsons, the New School of Design. Viana's work has been featured in the New York Times' Lens blog, Tag, Musée Mag, Refinery 29, and Ginger Zine. She is a 2019 fellow at the Leslie-Lohman Museum. Her work has been exhibited at Milk Gallery, Callan Gallery, and Powerhouse Arena. Please join me in welcoming Alison Viana.
Thank you, Tavia, for that lovely introduction. I'll be sharing my screen. One moment. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Alison Viana, and I'm a Jewish Cuban-American visual artist from Miami, and I currently live in Brooklyn, New York. I work primarily in photography, and I'm interested in exploring ideas around queerness, identity, representation, and marginality. Today, I'll be showing you three bodies of work, starting with an ongoing portrait series where I'm photographing people within the queer and trans community. Growing up in a Cuban household in Miami, the environment in which I was raised was very religious and homophobic. And as a queer kid growing up in a heteronormative and machismo environment, I didn't see myself fully reflected in that community, nor did I feel safe or comfortable to express myself. And it wasn't until I moved to New York where I found that community. And in having the opportunity to meet queer and trans people, I was able to see the wide spectrum of gender identities and expressions, and I realized I didn't have to fit into any particular box or gender construct. And for me, making these portraits was really in a way about like self-discovery, in meeting and having conversations with people in my community about our experiences with sexuality and gender. And it was really helped me in my journey towards like self-acceptance. And for me, it's also really important to reflect my community in a positive light. because the representation that existed growing up, there was barely any of it. And there was just, it was often very negative, or there's just like stereotypical portrayals around, you know, gay, lesbian, and trans people. And majority of the people you see in these images are friends of mine and people I've met throughout my time here in New York. And for example, Juan is someone I met a couple years back, and we met at a dance party, and I was immediately drawn to the way he carried himself, and he had so much confidence, and I was really drawn to that. And we exchanged information and have continued to collaborate ever since. Dons and Divas is a body of work that I created between 2014 and 2016, where I documented Black and brown hair salons throughout New York, Queens, the Bronx, and Brooklyn. And I was really interested in the role barbershops and beauty salons play, specifically in Black and brown communities. They're not only spaces where men and women go to get their hair done, but they're often places of solace where men and women go to really connect with the community and have conversations around politics or their relationships, you know, everything under the sun. And, you know, these are spaces where identities are constructed. And for me, photography is a collaborative process that requires long-term engagement and revisiting. And majority of these salons, I've revisited multiple times throughout the 3 years I worked on this body of work. And I really got to know the barbers and the beauticians, as well as the people who frequented the salons. And it was just, and so for me, like going into these spaces was really like going into someone's home, because, you know, everyone kind of knew each other, and it was just like a really intimate space. And I felt very lucky to have the opportunity to make this work and be granted access. So yeah, it was just a really special experience for me. No Anda Sola is a in-progress body of work where I'm focused on documenting queer and trans people of Cuban descent. And as a mixed race Latinx person, I'm really interested in exploring the relationship and intersection between these identities, as they're often very complex to navigate. And similar to the US, Cuba has gone great lengths to silence, repress, and erase LGBTQ history. So for me, in a way, making this work is really about recovering that history through a queer lens. And although visibility is a fundamental aspect of my work, I often question what visibility means and what does it achieve. And in thinking about representation, as well as the power dynamics inherent in taking a portrait, I've recently become more interested in anonymity and ideas around withholding information from the viewer. If you'd like to see more of my work, please visit my website. You can follow me on Instagram, or send me an email if you'd like to work together, or even want to chat for any reason. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Alison. That was great to see those three bodies of work. And I wanted to ask you a question about them. Maybe I have so many questions, but I'll try to restrict myself to one, which goes to the topic that you just mentioned at the end about becoming interested in what is not represented, or like the limits of visibility. And you showed us the second to last photo was done in this kind of deep chiaroscuro, in which the identity of the sitter is not made as legible as might be in some more typically lit portraits, right? But then thinking through that, then I see across your work a recurring interest in a sitter maybe turning their gaze partly away from turning their body partly away from the camera, maybe looking off or looking into a mirror rather than to the photographer. And I guess I'm curious if you wanted to say more about that, the kind of intentionality behind that decision to kind of reveal or withhold, and in particular, whether that comes out of, what is that process like for you in terms of the conversation with your sitters? Is that something that they want? Is it something that you want? Is it something that comes out of the process of taking the portrait?
Yeah, well, I mean that the answer I'm about to give is probably a little layered, because I've just recently started thinking more about, obscuring the person's identity. And tradition, I'm a traditional or I was taught in a traditional way of documentary. So a lot of my work, it shows the person, the frontal, like people looking directly at the camera. So I really want to change the way I do that. And because, like I said, like being a photographer, you hold a lot of power in being able to take someone's portrait and image. And with making this work specifically on LGBTQ plus Cubans, a lot of them are not necessarily out yet. And even growing up, you have to kind of be, you have to hide your sexuality. And so in a way, I'm approaching this body of work in that way where I don't want to really hold so much power in that and give the power back to the sitter. And as far as it being a conversation with the sitter, it's something that I come in wanting. And the sitters don't really know that I'm necessarily purposely like not showing their faces, but sometimes I have that conversation if they ask, because they typically want to stare into the camera. And I'm like, no, it's okay. Like you can do your thing and I'll just be here and we can just spend a few hours. And, sometimes I'll have them like get dressed and, I will photograph the process of that and move around and let them know they don't have to like, be aware of my existence in the room, and stare at me. I don't know if that answered your question fully.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And, we can come back and talk more about it and,
Yes.
and other aspects of your work after this. But in the meantime, I want to turn to our next presenter, and that is LeSeur, who will be presenting next. LeSeur is an artist working primarily with video, installation, photography, painting, and performance. Her work celebrates Blackness, contemplates the experience of invisibility, and seeks to dismantle and reclaim stereotypes surrounding Black female identity, among other subject matters. Awards include Leslie-Lohman Museum Artists Fellowship from 2019, the Time-Based Medium Prize, as well as the juried Grand Prize of Art Prize 10 from 2018. LeSeur recently appeared in conversation with Marilyn Minter at the Brooklyn Museum, presented by the Tory Burch Foundation, and has lectured at RISD Museum of Art, Providence, Rhode Island, and SCAD Atlanta, among others. Her work has been shown in solo and group exhibitions at Air Gallery, Brooklyn, New York, Assembly Room, New York, Microscope Gallery, Brooklyn, Anacostia Art Center, Washington, D.C., Site Lab, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Michigan represent, Amika Dawkins, Atlanta, GA, Georgia represent, Georgia might be saving our democracy right now as we speak, and others. Residences include the NARS Foundation, Marble House Project, and Mass MoCA. LeSeur is represented by Microscope Gallery. Please join me in welcoming LeSeur.
Thanks, Tavia. I appreciate that intro. I'm going to share my screen. I'm just going to say a few words before I get started. How is your heart? Is your breath happy here? And do you feel free? Maya Angelou once stated, life means all that it ever meant. It is the same that it ever was. There is absolute, unbroken continuity. Why should I be out of mind because I am out of sight? I am but waiting for you, for an interval, somewhere very near, just around the corner, and all is well. Do I feel free? Do I belong here? Am I worthy? Am I enough? Continuously asking myself, am I free? Our own physical body possesses a wisdom, a movement between still and chaos, finding healing in movements towards pain. There is a rhythm there, accompanied by the blues, a feeling of dreaming that can't be controlled, because we must dream without inhibitions, without refrain. Our dreams must be pure. Our dreams must be abundant. Our dreams must offer space to live freely. So yes, we do belong, but we continuously ask, are we free? And must I never forget the two most beautiful words ever placed together? Just be, just be. That excerpt was from a performance titled There Are Other Hues of Blue, which I first performed at Microscope Gallery in the summer of 2019, which is the image you're currently looking at on the screen. In the piece, which lasted about 70 minutes long, I sit with my back facing the audience and talk to myself as a way to reclaim language and the power it holds in allowing ourselves a freedom to be, a freedom to exist. The foundation of my current practice is centered around the healing nature within language and within its absence, and the gestural language created through repetitive movements. Visual and sonic fragments have always been a transcending element in how I connect with my identity as a Black queer woman. For this reason, my work continuously demands that we honor a silence within our lives where language is absent, and the stimulation created from that absence forces our bodies to then become present. This is present in pieces such as Maybe Rainbows Do Exist at Night, which is a 6-channel video installation focusing on the inner struggle oppressed bodies deal with to find transcendence and seek liberation within themselves. The video acts as a performance for the camera, shifting power dynamics throughout and forcing the viewer to acknowledge the presence of a Black femme body as a free moving figure. Continuously asking myself, what does that freedom look like? And what does it feel like? But while my work focuses on feelings as a primary reference point within each medium used, my work is also used to honor. The pieces that I'm going to show in the next couple of slides are all about honoring, to honor ordinary Black life, to honor life that has been lost, to use my body as a vessel to better understand the importance of this honoring, the importance of progress, no matter how slow or unintended it is, the importance of movement within my body as a way to honor, since so many Black bodies have been ripped of this act to progress. To honor family and the work blood family, chosen family, and ancestors have done to make sure that I'm able to exist freely. Asking myself through my work, how do I leave a trail of this work so a new history is written, so a new history based in truth is born? And are the remnants of this work valid enough for you to understand the importance of this honoring? The importance of my life? But also thinking about the influence of love. Love passed down from generations, a love so deep, a love so grand that the rhythm present in this love is echoed in every sound, in every movement, in every act that I do moving forward. Creating portraits of love like this portrait of my mother and myself, bonded forever through the intimate action of giving and receiving love. An honoring of that love, not just through the care of another body, but through the care of my own body, an understanding that I must first honor myself before I'm able to honor anyone else, allowing my body in duration, in time to be honored in stillness. The next few slides are from 2 projects, Girls, 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 and Brown, Carmine, and Blue. They explore so many themes, but within this work, I wanted to also explore the possibilities of color, to look at color as a powerful tool in transforming space, to adjust how color has been historically used, and allow color to embody spirit, allow it to embody presence, and to also embody healing. I am of a color, Black in various shades, My insides bleed blues. My womanhood bleeds reds, all varied, all a part of me. So when I create space, I'm welcoming you into me, into my body. The color is just as important as the content. I want you to feel part of me, to feel deeply, even if you have yet to experience this as your own lived experience. Because when you fully understand me, you can fully understand my needs, my need for space, my need for time, my need for life in order to heal. The color connects. It exudes permission to feel. It is of me. It represents a freedom, whatever I want that freedom to be. It is symbolic. It is present. It is truth. I am of a color. And lastly, in the fall of 2018, I performed for 2.5 weeks in an abandoned space in Grand Rapids, Michigan. For those 2.5 weeks, I carried close to 3,000 pounds of cinder blocks throughout the space. I had to understand the pain I was holding on to by carrying the weight of racially induced trauma. That experience for me was a rebirth. To let that weight go and to feel alive again, to feel free of burdens. But a few months later, the burdens came back, a continuous reminder of what it means to be Black, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be queer, is waking up every day and seeing your life taken from you piece by piece, a collective conscious of trauma, a collective memory of what has been and what will always be, as it has always been in the hands of another. So how do we release from this? How do we face ourselves and allow ourselves to let go? And in this final slide, this video, which I called Superwoman, that I took in the summer of 2018, is a self-baptism, but ultimately for me, a rebirth. I come back to this work frequently, understanding that this process still takes place in my life. I always tell myself I had to die. I die every day. Death is common knowledge. I see it every day. I feel it every day. Its weight is always there. Life has been taken away at the hands of another continuously. But to die is to only be reborn in the morning, reborn in the way that I need to be, reborn anew, a new body molded only in my hands, a new body free of burden, released from the weight of rebirth, a continuous cycle, a continuous way to honor, a continuous honoring of a life past and present, a continuous love for self. My work is that. My work is a rebirth. Thank you, I appreciate you all.
Thank you, Leandra, for showing us those and sharing with us all that wonderful, powerful work. And again, I have many questions that I would love to, especially about Superwoman, who I had the privilege to watch in a more extended version of this past weekend. But one thing that that this presentation actually brings to immediately to mind is for me the centrality of poetics in your work, not only the presence of poets like Maya Angelou, but the poetic voice of your own performance, right? Whether you're whether it's the text that you're reading in a piece, or maybe perhaps the way the movements themselves are performed or invented. So it's a very broad question, but what role does poetry and the poetics play in your work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think more recently I've been starting to take like full, I guess full throttle, like take that on as something that's a part of my work. Like this idea of like not only just being an artist, but in turn being a poet and thinking about my work as a form of poetry. Thinking about within poetry, the abstracted nature of language within poetry, but also the beauty that lies within the poetics of rhythm, and how that moves us. It's almost similar to music as well. You can listen to a song, you can read a poem, and in just the simplest way, it can move you a certain way that allows you to feel, allows you to open up. And within my work, I'm always trying for that, you know, to allow myself to feel more, to allow myself to open up more, but also to connect to the viewer in that way and hope that they also are going through that same experience of just allowing themselves to feel. And so I believe within that context, that's how poetry aligns with my work. And that's why I feel like in a lot of ways I've taken on this kind of stance of looking at the ways I can abstract, not just language within my work, but abstract an image, abstract all of these different feelings, also abstract knowledge that has been garnered as truth, which it doesn't necessarily have to be, and change the perspective of, you know, how we look at things, not just words, not just visuals, but also like how we look at ourselves. So yeah, that's kind of how it's taken form and how I process my work, but also how I create it.
Thank you. That's great, and it speaks to me this powerful way of a way in which your work is synesthesic, right? Like there's a transposition of sound into color, into movement, and into memory, right? In ways that are I think very important. Okay, so I have to turn now to our final presenter before inviting everyone back for a group conversation. And I'm very pleased to welcome Arisleyda Dilone. Arisleyda Dilone, born 1982 in Santiago de los Caballeros, Dominican Republic, is currently on This Body Too y Este Cuerpo También. Is currently working on, sorry, did I mistake that? Did I misread that? Is currently working on This Body Too y Este Cuerpo y También, a feature-length documentary that ruminates on femininity and womanhood in her Dominican American family through her gaze as an intersex woman. Simultaneously, she is working on a performance piece called A Plata. As an artist, her work emphasizes that the state of witnessing is full of power. There is nothing passive about it. Please join me in welcoming Arisleyda Dilone.
Hey, everyone. So I will say a couple of words. About 10 years ago, I began to make documentary films about, primarily about the women in my family and my body. I started working on This Body Too, and then realized that I could make just a short regarding the conversation with my mom. It was the first time that we had spoken about surgeries that were done to me and upcoming surgeries that I had to make decisions about. And also I took that as an opportunity to talk to her about her body. And then in the process of doing that, I filmed a short documentary with my nephew about the first time he met his father when he was 9. And I didn't meet my father till I was 9. So I saw this as a parallel moment to really capture a moment that I think has been normalized about paternal abandonment. And lastly, I've been working on This Body Too, where I talk to all the women in my family about their bodies and about the construction of femininity and womanhood in Dominican culture. So I'm just going to screen share and we'll watch a couple of clips. Oh my God. Sorry, everyone. My dad just came in and started using the bathroom really loudly. Can everyone see that? And just making sure everyone can also hear it.
Hermafroditas, para mí, en mis términos, es como puede ser que tú tengas los dos órganos, puede ser afuera o puede ser interno. Puede ser que tú seas hembra por fuera y que por dentro exista otro órgano que no se puede ver. Pero yo no creo que tú eres hermafrodita.
Será hoy cuando por fin la vea tal y como es, cuando nos abracemos piel a piel.
What are you driving? Oh, are you here? Alright.
Tell him to pull in the entrance by the rich.
He's driving a white Alara. What's an Alara?
Alaro, that's what is that? Samara. Did he say Samara?
Come on, man. Oh! Stop!
There he is, right there.
Wow, there's 2 white cars. There's 2.
Hay tomates que se dan en el hormigón armado. Hay semillas que regar.
Press escape. Okay. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing those excerpts from your work. And I wanted to, as you were playing them and thinking about, and as I was thinking about the longer versions of them, which I was, again, you were generous enough to share with me this weekend, the phrase that Leandra has used before in relationship to her work about honoring ordinariness came to mind in terms of thinking about your documentary aesthetic in both This Body Too and in Two White Cars. And I suppose my question then is, for This Body Too in particular, the title could be read in 2 directions. One, like thinking about your own body and narrative as equally valid alongside other ones that are seen as more normative, more normatively gendered, right? But then conversely, when we see the whole video, it's also about a variety of women actually talking about the ways in which they are also negotiating, right, expectations about femininity and womanhood. That there's almost a continuum, right, regardless of one's biology. And I was wondering if you could just say more about what that process was like, or has been like, right? Because I know it's a work in progress.
Yeah, it's a work in progress, and it's been you know, it's been interesting because I've realized how similar, you know, I'm intersex, but and so I've never got a period or developed breasts, and for a long time I thought I think that I've seen most of my family's world from the outside and been able to have some distance between, you know, how I see myself and how I see them. But then at a certain point, you know, and they were constantly imposing their values on me and telling me how I should dress or what I should look like out of protection, you know, this idea that other people would see me and think that I was different and that something might happen to me. And along the way, when I was 21 and underwent breast implants, then the rest of the women in my family felt this liberty to do it as well. They all wanted to and didn't have the courage to do it until I did it. So then all of a sudden, my body was somehow idealized as the new femininity that they wanted to be also. So there are all these layers of like, what is this womanhood and femininity, and what is its literal construction? And then when it comes to the moment, you know, there's such an avalanche, and I think a lot of immigrants and Black people and people of color in general can talk about what happens when trauma occurs and you're a child, and there's just an avalanche of events that happens one after the other, and you can't quite keep up. And then you don't, when you step out of it, and especially for me in my everyday practice, you know, meditation and general life, is to really be present with the moment. And then you realize how important the moment is. And you want to capture the moment, you know, you want to capture a moment like my nephew meeting his father, whether it's with an iPhone camera or with whatever, you just want to capture it because you want to let this person know, you want to let this child know, you want to let people involved that this is important. This seems ordinary, and yet as soon as you turn a camera on, it elevates everybody's role in that situation. And it's interesting enough, they all play this role and they play it so well, it feels like reality TV. You know, my sister starts yelling at him, where have you been, you know, and you never, and then my nephew's just sinking down in his chair and becoming this child who feels abandoned, and all these feelings come up. And it's like, you know, as soon as it happens, in anytime I turn on the camera with my family, they trust me enough to tell their stories, and so they open up and tell these stories that are both performative but also true. You know, there's so many things that happen with my I've been very fortunate to be able to capture their stories and for them to trust me. I think that in a lot of cultures, there are people who are trusted in the family to be the storytellers, you know, and all these different roles that they play, that they're assigned, you know. So I've been very fortunate to do that.
Yeah, and the stories that you tell are incredibly compelling. So your family,
thank you.
pick the right storyteller. No, you're very welcome. Okay, so I guess I'm going to, at this point, welcome everyone back into the conversation, and also say that those in the audience should feel, you know, now is the time to start putting questions in the Q&A if you have a question for one or any of our panelists. So I'll start reading those shortly, but I wanted to at first start a conversation for at least 10 minutes or so, 10, 15 minutes amongst the four of us. And the first question that I have, and I want to get back to aspects of your individual practice and maybe even sort of themes or constellations between your practices. but since we're convened under the aegis of the Leslie-Lohman residency, which for you began in person and then has ended in this virtual form, I wanted to ask any or all of you to talk about how your work as an artist has been transformed by the last, the last 8 months, the pandemic, the worldwide, but also U.S. Specific protests against police violence in the summertime, and now most recently by the kind of big exhalation of relief with the outcome of the election, although it's not, of course, a complete exhalation because there's still so much work. But there's been so much, right, that it's almost impossible to really narrate what's happened to us all. But I'm just curious how you have, has it been, have you been able, how has it impacted your work or the kind of work you want to do or how you work? That question is to anyone.
Is anyone going to take it? I guess I will. I really, we were talking about this the other day. I really hate this Zoom. I hate Zoom a lot, and I hate this kind of that we've been relegated to this form of presentation, of presenting our work and about talking to each other through this. I think that I hope that we get more creative. I've taken a step back from anything and everything social media and anything and everything like this. I have a duty as a fellow to do this presentation. And of course, I am very thankful and grateful for this opportunity. But I think that overall, I think that the system is winning in this way. I think there's something before COVID that was happening that I think this feeds into, which is this dehumanizing of the way we interact with each other, this of the way that we engage with each other. And I think there's got to be another way. There's got to be another way for us to move forward with the way that we present our work, especially as artists. I think we can be more creative. I don't know what that looks like. I just know that I've been focused on doing this performance aplata, which translates to squatting. And it reduces a lot of my life story about growing up and living in this village in Dominican Republic, and in general, stories of my families and myself and immigration and etc., to gestures, movements, songs, props. And I want to do that work in a big, loft-like space where people can have, social distancing take place, but also I don't want to do it. I don't want to present it online. And it just seems like part of performance will be like that breathing together, inhaling and exhaling together in a room as I put my body through, like Leandro was saying, repetitive movements and taxing work to tell a story. Or to, share something.
That does actually make me think directly about, Leandro, your work and the centrality of breath to it. So maybe have you had this similar kind of experience about the airless quality of life in quarantine?
Yeah, I was gonna add to that. There's been this kind of shift in understanding like energy, and also the shift in like understanding like intimacy and like what it means to truly be like really intimate with yourself, and understanding like fully of your body and the space that your body occupies at all times, which has led me to like truly see like really deep parts of myself that I don't think I would have seen outside of this year. I mean, this year has been rough for so many people, but I think it's really truly allowed us to kind of like dig in and look deeper at who we are and kind of understand like how we navigate and how we have to navigate at this time with such intention, because it is such a sensitive time, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us. And again, keeping that understanding of not just our energy, but the energy that we keep with us, but also the energy that we give to others. And yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about that, and the intention about who I've been with and understanding like the people I've been around and them understanding the sensitivity of the times, and us just able to share space and like celebrate one another, even though right now it feels like it can't be a celebration because of all that's happening. So that's been interesting. But going back to that thought about like breath, just think like everything that I've been doing, I've been thinking about the intention behind it, and how important it is right now to focus that intention, not just even on myself, but again, the people around me, and thinking about community in that way as well.
Yeah, no, I totally, I hear you. And there's more than two responses or experiences to the pandemic, certainly, but one kind of polarity that I personally felt, which I'm resonating with what you're saying, right, is on the one hand, a kind of acceleration of these demands to kind of, dehumanizing demands, as Arisleyda puts it, to keep productive and to keep engaged through digital means. But then also somewhere underneath that, a kind of real quiet, and like, as one of my friends said, 2020 said, sit your ass down. And like many of us, including myself, who were just circulating, around the world, around the country, around the city, just like get to know your neighbors for, 6 months, and walk to the park and cook at home, like fire up the stove in ways. Anyway, so this is be intentional about your interactions, which I think has been really powerful. Alison, for your, and I'm curious about the kind of work you've been able to do during the pandemic, in part because of the way you talk about your process is much about engaging people and getting trust. Portraiture, I mean, I know portraiture is still happening under the pandemic, but under new, different conditions. Is this a time in which you're going through your slides and thinking about past work, or are you finding inspiration? Did you find inspiration in this past? It's not quite over yet, but in this year.
Yeah, it seems like we're in a very long road right now.
Oh God, and endless.
But yeah, at the beginning of the pandemic. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
What was that? You broke out a little bit. Oh, so yeah, at the beginning of the pandemic, I kind of like slowed down a lot because I was kind of photographing really often and really trying to produce work. And the pandemic kind of put a pause on that, because a lot of my work, I work with people and it's about getting really close, and often I photograph inside people's homes. And so at the beginning, I was definitely like wanted to be safe, and so I just didn't like make much work at the beginning. And then like as the pandemic kind of progressed, and as things got better, a little bit better in New York, I started photographing, like meeting up with friends that live in the neighborhood and going to the park, and kind of just making work just from the pure joy of like photographing people and like having conversations and things of that nature. And then I also took the time to like really also during this time, since I couldn't meet with people, I would talk to people on the phone, people who I've worked with in the past, and just to kind of like touch base and see how they're doing during the time and during this time. And I also took the time to also like, like you said, like rest and really cook good food and really like take care of yourself, and put more time to that. Cause I just, the pace of New York is just go, go, go. So really allowed me to think about slowing down and even revisiting old work and things that I didn't normally have the time to do.
So speaking of revisiting, I think the three of you are also revisiting your relationship through the Leslie-Lohman Gallery. And before I open it up to audience questions, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to ask a question of one another, or something that kind of came out during the first part of the conversation, something that you left out about one or the other of your work.
Well, I don't know about my work, but I was thinking about, well, both of you, Lei and Arisleyda. Well, first I'll start off with Lei, since she went after me. When I was looking at your work, I really thought of, like, for example, James Turrell, because he often works with light, and I went to see his show like last year. And so when you're talking, I don't know if you can speak more about that, about like light and how that does affect your mood, because like I know some people may not like him, but like Kanye West, for example, like works with James Turrell, and then he brings in music because there's certain sounds that are connected with mood. And I don't know if you could speak more to that, because I was really interested in that.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up James Turrell, because I have a very interesting feelings about his work. I went into it at the beginning as a fan, but it's a lot of control in his work that somewhat bothers me in regards to like how you should respond. But in regards to kind of like light and just color and like those dynamics, I always think about this quote from Margot Humphrey, who's a printmaker who speaks about color in her work. It's in a bell hooks book, Art on My Mind, Visual Politics. And she specifically talks about the color being the invite into the content of the work. And so thinking about this, the process of kind of creating space, for me, has always been thinking about like, how can I invite someone who may not automatically understand or be able to empathize with what I'm speaking to? How do I invite them into a space, and through that invite, kind of capture their attention? And then from there, they then have like this process of then diving in deeper and having a deeper understanding and looking even more deeply into kind of the content and what is filling up the room outside of this light and color. And so for me, that's always been a constant thing that I've been trying to do in terms of how I approach the kind of creation of space, and the use of color and the use of light. But also thinking about light is always symbolic for so many things. And again, going back to this idea of like, how do we kind of question the symbolism of some of that? I mean, there's a constant use of obviously reds and blues in my work. I think when I started doing that was because I was thinking constantly, subconsciously, about this idea of freedom, and how for certain people, freedom is totally different. And that's just based on like who they are and how they identify and how they see themselves, in the world, but also how the world views them. And so thinking about like how this color, like how can I claim this color to be seen as like the way that I identify, the way that I view my own freedom, thinking about like this idea of the color blue, representing these blues, these like, this, people think of the blues, they think of sadness, but for me, it's thinking about looking at myself as a whole, and through looking at myself as a whole, having a better understanding of who I am, and through that better understanding, being able to liberate my own self. And then with the idea of the reds, thinking about my womanhood, thinking about red as being this kind of blood kin connection, but also this connecting to giving new life. So not necessarily giving life to another person, but again, going back to this idea of rebirth and giving life again to myself through this color. So those are some of the things that I kind of think through when I'm thinking about colors and the dynamics of them.
Did you have a quote? Did you have a question for Arisleyda?
No, it's okay.
Awesome.
I was just thinking, thanking Leandra for answer. Like that was a beautiful answer. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe at this point we should open it up unless any of you have another question for each other, for one another. I see we have 3 questions now in the Q&A. So let me just go to that. And the first one comes from Ava, and it is for Alison. I'll do my best to read this out. I'm curious as to why you chose to document Black hair salons as a non-Black person. Do you have a personal connection to that space? Or do you feel you are entering as a colonizer or voyeur? Is there something problematic in the power dynamic that isn't present in your work with queer Cubans?
Well, thank you for that question, Ava. So growing up in Miami, I was around many Hispanic people, and when I was about 13 years old, my mother placed me in like a predominantly Black tennis program, and so that was also part of my childhood in a way. Like through my teen years, is like I was the only like white passing person in like a Black community. And I noticed like that project came about through like a root of these experiences as a child, like, or in my adolescence of being around many, like in the Black community. And there was like this fascination with hair, and not that I had, but that I noticed, about the way they spoke about my hair and about each other. And so it just became an interest. And I didn't just photograph Black hair salons. It was also like Hispanic hair salons, like Dominican hair salons, and just around the communities here in New York. And I am other, like I am, so like learning about like when I started photography, something that I liked about it, or at least I liked at the beginning, was this idea that I could enter into other communities to photograph. And I try to be like very mindful of that and try to really get to know communities, not just like step in and photograph and like take. And so, because photography can often be like exploitative, and I understand that. And if I were to, I probably wouldn't approach that project today with who I am today. But at the beginning of my art practice, I was really interested in this idea how like the photographer can go into spaces that are not necessarily their own. And so that was like a interest of mine, was going into, because when I moved to New York, I was often in like Black neighborhoods, or predominantly Black neighborhoods. And so that was my surroundings. So I wanted to kind of connect with the community in that way. And that was my way of doing it, of having like a sort of a reason for that. And, I just really wanted to like honor those spaces as important spaces in the neighborhood. I don't know if that answered your question.
If not, they can follow up. Yeah, sorry, this is the nature of the format here where I have to read out the questions. There was no way of actually having the questioners speak directly in the webinar, unfortunately. But the idea of a surround is actually a good segue to a question from Engbang Lim, who asks, this is to the panel, are notions of queer futures and freedoms in your works transformed by our American political surround? And American is in quotes. So are notions of queer futures and freedoms in your works transformed by our American political surround?
That's a
Anyone
very
want
broad. I mean, there's a lot there. There's a lot there because queer futures and freedoms. What exactly do you mean? Does this person mean by that? I could just say in my work, I think that what makes my work particularly interesting is that a queer person who may potentially have been marginalized here. By here I mean in the Dominican Republic, the country I was born in. I am actually in a position of power in my family that immigrated to a place where I was the first one to attend college, the first one to do a lot of things, a lot of firsts. And that's not to say it wasn't possible somewhere else, but it's definitely informed my relationship to my family, deconditioning from the American everything, right? Aesthetic, whatever, deconditioning from the American mindset about race, about culture, about imperialism, patriarchy, its relationship to all those things, deconditioning on my own through my own life journey, and then going back to my family to kind of film them be in this, milieu or whatever of Long Island, predominantly white Long Island, who actually just voted 55% for Trump. And the second time around, they also voted 55% or something like that the first time around in 2016. And we grew up in that. And my parents were, oblivious to that because they were working. And same thing with a lot of my siblings, because they didn't have, they just had everyone had a different experience, and deconditioning from assimilation is its own process, but being able to be a queer person who is telling the story of, and kind of helping them come to terms with what America has been to us, and now a lot of my family is either moving back to the Dominican Republic or just in general retiring and having kind of made their life there and making peace with what America has meant. And in reality, it hasn't meant, good things other than money. And that's the thing, is that, America, for all its intents and purposes, no one wants American culture. They want the money. And no one leaves the country they're from to go, I want to be, I love American culture. And the idea of freedom and these things, it's like you get there and you find that it's not any more free than the country you're leaving. It's different. It's different. It's a different level of, it's just different, but it's not necessarily, my parents were never home and my father went to jail for 5 years. I didn't meet him until I was 9. My mother worked 16-hour days and we raised each other. And I was leaving a village where I had like 5 moms because my great aunt was raising me, her daughters were raising me, my aunts were raising me. And so it was just a very different, not to romanticize the village, but it was just a different culture. So yeah, I think in my work for sure, but it's all very subtle and layered. It's not like my work is about the political system and its, imposition on our lives, but there are subtle ways in which it does that, right? There are subtle ways in which everything pushes women to get breast implants and to do things that, that define femininity and womanhood. So for me to look at that and say, look at the literal construction of it, you think that I am less of a woman until I get breast implants. And then now I'm more of a woman, but am I any more of a woman than before if I still have male chromosomes? And to top it off, I had to literally put something in my body in order for me to naturally be a woman. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff there about to really chew on.
Right. Anyone else want to tackle that question, or should I?
Yeah, I was just gonna, Arisleyda, you said so much that was like really important in response to that question. I feel like that question is really a lot to think on because, there's this obvious response that yes, the politics of this country, like definitely inform who we are because, we grew up within the system and that is what we've kind of been conditioned to see and conditioned to respond to. And so it's informed like how I question things within my work. And I've been constantly questioning as of late, you know, like this difference between reclamation and just claiming. And, you know, thinking about like, what is the kind of the line that we cross where we stop talking about our centering the beginning as this centering of whiteness, but instead start centering like our own histories and narratives, and that just be the source and that just be the reference from now on, you know? Like, I mean, Alison, I know you were asking me a question about James Turrell, but you know, like that goes into that instead of like thinking about his work as like a reference point, our source, you know, him being a white cis male, thinking more so about just like our own work and the work we're currently doing as being the new reference point, the new source. And that goes into this claiming rather than reclamation. So I think in regards to like the political aspect of everything in life, that has like pushed me to question those things. And that has informed like how I think about this idea of, you know, queer futures and queer freedoms. And what does that look like? And I think what that looks like in the future, to be honest, is just like this going against reclamation and just claiming, you know, claiming what's ours and us being like, you know, that visual reference point in creating that new language and that new narrative.
Alison, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I agree completely with Arisleyda and Leandra. And just to add on, yeah, you kind of have to create, like, that's why it's so important to document your communities, to like really push forward, like, yeah, new reference points, like recovering history, creating our own history, and through documentation of either our own bodies or of others. Yeah.
Great. Thank you all. The next question is from Stamatina, and it is for Leandra. Leandra, you mentioned in your presentation, I believe in reference to the performance at NARS, I hope I'm saying that right, that you intended for the body, your body, to move freely without restrictions to jazz music. The remnants of the performance, the gestural abstractions of acrylic on canvas. Yeah, actually, this is a question I had as well, so thank you for asking it, Stamatina. Have a visual relationship to historical abstract expressionism, which also has a relationship to jazz, and a mythic relationship to the idea of free movement of the body. Can you speak to this relationship? I mean, you're kind of already saying it in your answer just now, the relationship of myth and history in your work. How do the dynamics of free movement and restriction/control operate in your work? So the question about myth and history, and then an interrelated question about the dynamics of free movement and restriction.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to, again, what was just said in regards to this kind of reclamation and claiming, within like a lot of the performative work that I'm doing, I'm thinking constantly about like how the body again is like conditioned to kind of move and be in a certain way based on like what we've been taught and what we've seen. I mean, thinking about just visual media, for instance, in the way that like Black femme bodies, for instance, have been objectified, but also just presented in such a negative way for years and years and years. And there's now been this kind of unraveling and undoing of that. And I think that's just due to the work that, you know, people are doing day in and day out to just kind of change that narrative and not just look back, but just look at what's happening now. But if there is something that we're looking back to, we're looking back at reference points of people who have always gone against that and kind of went against conforming to that narrative. So yeah, I think in regards to that question, which is a really great question, I'm always constantly thinking about within my work, like, how do I just allow myself to remove that thinking? And when that thinking is removed, like, how does my body respond to that? How does my body react to that? And there's almost like this calling to ancestors to kind of like come into my body. And when I'm moving in that way, it's not just me, but it's me doing this kind of collective movement. It's not just for me, it's for like all of like the Black women that came before me who have done that work, who have continuously like laid the grounds, laid the space for me to do that work. So I'm always thinking about that. But yeah, when I'm doing that performance, I feel like something takes over me. And in all honesty, I'm thinking about the historical aspect of just like movement and rhythm that's just in your DNA, that just comes to you. And that has been something that has been I've been freely able to exude within the performances and within that work. And it's something I'm actually calling like rhythm paintings, and moving also into kind of this cultural element too, where it's just about the rhythm that's just within me, and allowing that to just speak. So yeah.
It's almost like the picture plane. I was so struck by those images as well, is where the picture plane is where the color blue and the rhythm of the blues are kind of brushing up against each other, right? In this really wonderful way that indexes history and then also leaves this trace, right? That's so powerful. Thank you for that answer. So we have time, I think, for a couple more questions. Yes, we have maybe about 10 minutes. The next one is from Jessica Thayer, which is a question for everyone, but in particular to Arisleyda. Arisleyda, you mentioned this inhaling and exhaling in a room, which struck me. It made me think of this constantly holding of breath when we view anything on the internet, or that everything comes out in run-on sentences and rushed pitches, constant needs for attention, and meetings that we drone along with. Do you find new observations in the ways that your pieces achieve space and breadth in this new type of exhibition because of its own inherent power? Do you recognize a new stillness or beauty in things, or does it carry feelings of dysphoria for anyone? I am a teaching artist, and what I tell my students is right away is, when you pick up the camera, film something that makes your heart race, right? Like pick up a camera, and what you are transmitting is literally your heart through the camera onto the screen. When the person looks at you, the other side in front of the camera, they're looking at you, even though you have a camera in front of you, and they are going to project to you what you want them to see. If you're vulnerable with them, they will be vulnerable with you. And I think people want to see vulnerability on screen. They want, Roger Ebert said, like films are like a empathy machine. And I believe in that. I agree with that. I think that there's something about creating images and moving images that can move people. And not necessarily to action towards something, like whatever, if it does, if it doesn't, but it moves them inside. And that is powerful enough to move someone inside for them to see it. I think that with like what we were talking about before 2020, with this kind of communicating through Instagram and through Facebook and through computers all the time, emails, whatever, is this anxiety that everyone keeps talking about. Everyone's like, oh my God, my anxiety is through the roof. Well, it's like computers, technology, the way that we've been using it, and the way that they are constantly telling us we need this, we need that. Everything is, we fucking need the new thing in order to connect and to stay connected to people. It's like, maybe 2020, we just need a year off from all of it. What happens? Things will crash, and I think we want things to crash. Everyone was memeing about the apocalypse and about all these things. Well, welcome to the apocalypse. It's actually take a breath and move away from the direction we were moving in, which is this hyper connectivity that was so flaccid anyway. It was so superficial. It's been so superficial for so long. I'm not saying, I think we all struggle with it, but if we all put an effort in and we all decide, individually too, this is the thing, is if we all have the moment, we all have this time, we all talk about self-care. Self-care means for me, self-care has meant, how long can I sit in a room by myself in stillness with no type of entertainment, right? And like, sometimes that means meditation, close your eyes and you meditate. I can do that now. But what about away from everything, without closing my eyes, just watching it rain or whatever, anything but constant entertainment? I think that our work demands that, because when
get behind the camera, or when you take a photo, or when you are in a performance and you're doing that work, you have to be fully present in order for people to feel what you're doing.
I think you've given us a very rigorous definition of self-care that I, for one, am going to like take away from this conversation. Yes, when I can actually sit in a room and not reach.
Well, I feel like,
phone.
self-care has been it's become such a, so washed
Absolutely.
down, and it
Absolutely.
sucks. I mean, my teacher, I've had my theater teacher, she's more than just my theater teacher, but we'll say that my theater teacher for years has been telling me about this time was coming, this time of like, if we're all working towards institutions crumbling and towards, questioning institutions and doubting, then that means we have to figure out how we live day to day. That isn't this idea of like self-care, I'm going to eat chocolate and take a bath, but then I'm going to be anxious, I'm going to, completely numb out to something. It's like, okay, well, what happens if you actually live every single second? It's painful, but that's
true.
Part of it.
Yeah. Thank you. And I know that question was to everyone, so if you burning addendum, but I did want, in the interest of time, to try to get at least one more question in. This is for Alison from Phaedra Robinson, and the question is that you spoke of community and later of feelings of being other. How have you found your work in terms of allowing strangers or communities to embrace you, considering the role of photography, which you've just spoken about? And in particular, have you found the connections with community you hoped for through photography?
So simple answer, yes, I have.
Okay.
And I'm continuing to expand my community, and growing up just not knowing many specifically like queer Cuban people, like that's been my present mission, is to kind of expand that more. So that's why I'm making work about that particular group of people. But yeah, I feel like photography has definitely allowed me to connect with people in ways, and really grow myself through those interactions of photographing people, having conversations around our identities and our experiences. And yeah, it really makes me feel a little less other by creating like a world around myself that I want to see, which is why I photograph, people who are often like underrepresented. And so, yeah, I just really feel like I am able to connect with people in that way. And I found community through that.
Out of curiosity, this wasn't part of the question, but now have you ever felt motivated to explore self-portraiture, or is it primarily a dynamic that Arisleyda was talking about? Is that like you find yourself in the image of in the image of others, that you the portrait you take of others?
Well, you kind of cut out because I think my internet's kind of bad.
Oh.
I only heard the first half. I'm sorry.
Well, that first half was a key part, is like just whether you've ever explored self-portraiture and what that's been, what's that been like in terms of finding community, I suppose. Right?
Yeah, no. So
within yourself, right?
No, right. I never photographed myself, but funny enough, like during this pandemic, I've thought of it more, and I just haven't gotten myself to do it because there's something about photographing your own body I know Arisleyda and Leandra do it, and I just find that a little bit frightening to because I never really take self-portraits. I don't find a natural I'm not naturally gravitated to doing so, but I have thought of it when I don't, in these situations of a pandemic, when I don't really have anyone else to photograph. I'm like, oh wait, maybe I just look into the mirror and photograph myself. And not that I need to show anyone those images, but just the mere fact of just trying, experimenting and doing it. So I have thought of it, I just haven't done it yet.
Okay, so the final question, unless there's another one coming in, is for Leandra, and it's from Sarah Brooke. Leandra, I'm curious about the incorporation of poetics and poetry into your work. Was that a process or was it present from the start? In other words, can you say more about the relationship between the visual and the literary in your practice?
Yeah, I mean, it was for sure a process. For a very long time, only thought the visual could exist alone. And I started, I guess, kind of contemplating like the visual, because I was working with photography, taking photographs. Then I started diving into video and understanding this process of capturing a moment over time. And how I have this kind of control of slowing that down. In slowing that down and understanding that stillness, I was able to like think about like what was actually going through my mind and through my soul when I was like slowing that down and actually in front of the camera sitting in that stillness. And so every time there were words that came to me, I felt it was important to add that to the work because like that process of thought for me became a part of the work, not just as like, you know, something that I can just live with or exist with, but something that I would need to put out and allow people to also like hear that and be a part of that. And so I started like adding kind of these words and language to the work. And in adding that, it was like this freeing gesture for me that just became like so beautiful for me to experience my own words played back and to hear something that I wrote maybe 5-6 years ago, read it again or hear it again and like feel that same feeling that I felt when I first wrote those words down. So that became really, really important in my process of like creating work, but also in my process of life, just being able to kind of write these things out, these emotions when I'm, you know, I've always say when I'm feeling extreme sadness, feeling extreme joy, just being able to write that out, even if it doesn't make sense at the time, because for me, always coming back to that, it made sense. And it was just a way for me to process and heal. And my work is about this idea of processing and healing. So it just kind of gradually, but naturally became a part of that process in creating. And it's been a beautiful process in understanding kind of the poetics of my own language, because for a very long time, I didn't think I could speak as well enough as, you know, as most people would. But I also didn't think I had the language that, you know, could exude some type of beauty within myself or exude like what I was like really, really feeling and speak to the truth of that.
Wow. We are at we're at the point where we've answered all the questions and you've all been extraordinarily, oh, actually, hang on. Did one just come in right now? Sorry. Maybe I will indulge one final question. This is from Mary Twitty. How do you, and it actually follows, I think, on what you just said, Leandra, how do you tend to your grief and pain on the daily that you are able to carry it with you into an unfolding of easeful flow? Or is it only perceived as easeful flow? That might be directed at you, Leandra, but maybe it's to everyone. How do you attend to your grief and pain on the daily that you're able to carry it with you into an unfolding of easeful flow? Or is it just perceived as an easeful flow?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say to just briefly answer that. It for me has just been, I don't think I'm thinking about the perception of it, but just thinking about like how important it is to kind of let go, I guess, of that grief. And in that letting go, that process, when I speak or when I create some type of visual language, for me, that has always been kind of natural to just like allow those things to be and exist. And it's kind of created this rhythm that sometimes I don't know where it necessarily comes from, but it's just thinking back of like, I'm stopping myself from trying to understand it or think about it and just letting it be and just allowing for it to be. And just thinking about, you know, however it's perceived is one thing, but for me, it's just a way to release, and it's just a way to let go. And that's been like truly important in understanding grief and being able to process it, for sure.
For me, it has been, I think my whole life, I've been very joyful as a starting point and as an ending point of anything and everything that I do. So much so, you know, I was like a clown in school, but also even in my family, my mother was extremely violent and like abusive and all these things. But I, as a storyteller, there was always this part of me that was so removed that almost like kept a note of it and thought that everything had a use for me and a use for everybody to learn from, right? And so everything is useful. Everything has its, I wouldn't say everything has its purpose. It's not like one of those like, you know, whatever, everything has a purpose or any this or that. No, it's not. I don't mean that. I meant like you can look at something and understand that it's not for nothing. Everything has all these factors and causes. And when you sit down and write about it and you recognize the humanity in what's happening, that, you know, I learned a lot from my mother, from the abuse. I'm not, and mainly not to abuse others, right? To like not repeat those patterns. And I think that when you do that, you kind of flip pain and you kind of flip grief and you do something to it. It kind of dissolves. It loses some of its power when you are aware of it and when you look at it as a thing and say, look at that feeling, or look at this thing that's occurring through my body. To be able to do that and then get back to joy, you know, because you're still here. You're not, I mean, I'm healthy, I'm this, I'm that. There's so many things, right? There's so many little things that are aggregating to me to be able for me to continue. So yeah, joy.
Joy. That might be the best possible place to end, actually, because we're a little bit over time. And I see Stamatina coming back on the call. Do I hand things over to you, or yes?
Yeah, I just want to close out with some comments and huge thanks. Thank you so much, Alison and Leandra and Arisleyda, for your extraordinarily powerful and moving presentations. Thank you, Tavia, for a discussion that touched on so many different levels of meaning making. And our staff, and to Ella for all the preparation. A lot went into this evening. And please join us next week, Monday at 6 p.m. for a discussion with our fellows, Heather Lynn Johnson, Stefa Marin-Alarcon, and Muse Dodd, who will be in conversation with Legacy Russell. And for more information on all of our programs to come, please follow us on LLM's website and on Instagram. And thank you so much again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.